My mother told me I would amount to nothing. She Googled my name last Tuesday. She has not called since. My mother said it on a Thursday evening in the kitchen of the house I grew up in. I was 22 years old. I had just told her I was leaving. Not the city. Not the country. Just the path she had decided for me, the accounting degree I had been halfway through for 2 years, and that had been slowly consuming me from the inside the way something does when it belongs entirely to someone else's vision of your life, and not at all to yours. I had a plan. I had been building it quietly for 8 months. A design program at a school 3 hours away. A part-time job I had already secured. A room in a shared house I had already viewed. I had prepared the way I prepared everything that mattered to me, thoroughly, privately, without asking for permission I knew would not be given. I told her over dinner. Calmly. With the specifics already in place, so there was nothing to negotiate and nothing to dismantle. She looked at me across the table for a long moment. Then she said, "You will amount to nothing." Not in anger. Not in the heat of a fight that had been building. In the flat, certain tone of someone stating a fact they have already processed and arrived at and are now simply delivering. My name is Zola. I was 22 years old, and I had just been told by the woman who raised me that my future was already decided and it was empty. What happened in the 14 years after that sentence is the story I am going to tell you now. I need to tell you about my mother before I tell you what I built. Celestine was not a cruel woman. I want to be precise about that because cruelty is easy to leave, and she was not easy to leave. She was a woman who had worked exceptionally hard for everything she had and who believed, with a completeness that left no room for alternative interpretations, that she understood what hard work required and what it produced and what happened to people who deviated from the proven path. She had come from very little. Built a stable life through discipline and sacrifice and the specific kind of determination that comes from having no safety net and no tolerance for failure. She was a nurse for 31 years. She raised 3 children largely alone after my father left when I was 9. She managed money with a precision that bordered on severity, and she regarded anything that could not be measured in concrete outcomes with a suspicion she made no effort to conceal. Art was not a concrete outcome. Design was not a concrete outcome. A creative program at a school 3 hours away was not a concrete outcome. She had wanted accounting for me because accounting was a concrete outcome. A qualification. A salary. A trajectory she could understand and believe in and describe to her colleagues with the specific pride of someone whose sacrifices have produced visible results. When I told her I was leaving accounting, she heard something else entirely. She heard, "Your sacrifices were not enough. Your vision was wrong. I am choosing something you cannot measure, and I am doing it without asking you." She was not wrong about what I was saying. She was wrong about what it meant. The morning after the Thursday dinner, I packed 2 bags. Not because I had to leave immediately. Because I had learned, in 22 years of living inside my mother's certainty, that if I did not move fast, the weight of her conviction would find its way into me, and I would spend another 8 months talking myself back out of the only decision I had made in years that felt completely true. I said goodbye to my younger sister Amma, who was 16, and who hugged me at the front door with the fierce, brief grip of someone who understands something is happening and does not want it to be happening and loves you anyway. My mother did not come to the door. I heard her in the kitchen. The sound of dishes being washed, the specific rhythm of someone performing a domestic task with more force than the task requires, which was her version of an emotion she had decided not to show. I stood in the hallway for a moment. Then I picked up my bags and walked out. The drive to the new city took 3 hours and 12 minutes. I know the exact time because I watched the clock the entire way, in the way you watch things when you are not yet sure the decision you have made is real and you need the accumulation of minutes to confirm it. By the time I arrived, it was real. I unpacked my 2 bags. I made my bed. I stood at the window of my small room and looked out at a city I did not yet know. I felt afraid. I also felt, underneath the fear, something that had not been present in a very long time. I felt like myself. The design program was 3 years. I will not pretend they were easy years. They were not. The part-time job covered rent and food and little else. There were months where I made decisions about money that I do not look back on with anything except the sober recognition that I did what I needed to do and it worked. My mother called twice in the first year. Both calls were brief and carried the specific quality of someone performing a duty they have not resolved their feelings about. She asked if I was managing. I said yes. She said to call if I needed anything. I said I would. We both understood that I would not call and that the offer was not quite genuine and that we were both doing the best we could with a situation that neither of us had language for yet. In the second call, she said my cousin Dara had just qualified as an accountant and had started at a firm downtown. I said that was wonderful. I meant it. Dara's success had nothing to do with my choices, and I had no interest in the comparison my mother was drawing. After that second call, she did not call for 11 months. I told myself it was fine. Some days it was fine. Other days it was the specific ache of being someone whose mother had decided, at 22, that her future was empty and had not yet found reason to revise that assessment. I converted that ache into work. It is not a healthy long-term strategy. In the short term, it is extraordinarily productive. I graduated from the design program at the top of my cohort. The head of the program, a woman named Iris, who had been the first person in my professional life to look at my work and respond to it as though it was saying something worth hearing, told me at the end of my final year that she had been teaching for 19 years and that my final project was among the best 3 she had seen in that time. She said it plainly, without the performance of praise that makes you distrust the praise. She said it the way someone states a fact they have assessed carefully and arrived at honestly. I thanked her. I said I would not have known how to make it without the 3 years. She said, the 3 years helped. But what is in the work was already in you. We simply gave you a place to let it out. I thought about my mother saying you will amount to nothing on a Thursday evening in a kitchen. I thought about what it means to be told the most important thing about your future by someone who loves you and is completely wrong. I graduated on a Saturday in June. Amma came. She sat in the front row and cried with the specific openness of someone who has not yet learned to manage visible emotion, and I was grateful for every tear. My mother did not come. I had not told her the date. My first job after graduating was at a small studio in the city. For people. A founder named Clem who had a reputation for taking on projects that larger studios considered too difficult or too unconventional, and who ran the studio with the specific energy of someone who has chosen difficulty deliberately because difficulty is where the interesting work lives. I had applied on a Tuesday. By Thursday, I was sitting across from Clem in a room full of work on every wall, and he was looking at my portfolio with the expression of someone encountering something they recognize. He said, "Where have you been?" I said, "Finishing my degree." He said, "We need you to start Monday." I started Monday. The studio was the first professional environment I had worked in where the quality of the thinking mattered more than the conventional presentation of it. Where being wrong was acceptable, but being unthinking was not. Where I was required to push past the obvious version of every solution and find the truer one underneath. I was not good at all of it immediately, but I was good at the fundamental thing I could see. I could look at a problem and find the angle that nobody else had tried yet. Clem called it my instinct. I called it the thing that had been there for as long as I could remember, and that I had spent 22 years in a household where it had no name and no value. I worked at the studio for 3 years. By the end of the 3rd year, I had a reputation that had begun to travel beyond the studio walls. The first time my name appeared in print was in a design industry journal in my 2nd year at the studio. A piece about emerging practitioners in the sector. For names. Mine was the 3rd. The journalist had contacted me through the studio. She had asked good questions and listened carefully and written 3 paragraphs about my work that were accurate in the way that only happens when someone has genuinely looked at what you do rather than simply at what you say about what you do. I read the piece 6 times on the morning it published. Then I thought about sending it to my mother. I sat with that impulse for a long time. I understood what it was, the 22-year-old version of me, still standing in that kitchen, still wanting the sentence to be revised, still wanting the woman who had told her she would amount to nothing to look at evidence to the contrary and update her assessment. I did not send it. Not out of pride. Out of the honest recognition that I was not yet ready for the response, whatever it would be. If she was dismissive, I would carry it for months. If she was warm, I might read too much into it and make myself vulnerable to the next dismissal. I was not ready. I put the journal in a drawer and went back to work. The drawer had been filling for a long time. I started my own studio in my 4th year after graduating. Not dramatically. Not with a grand announcement or a significant financial backing or the kind of launch that requires a venue and a mailing list. I left Clem's studio on a Friday with his full blessing. He had known for 6 months it was coming and had spent those 6 months making sure I left with everything I needed. And on Monday morning, I sat at a desk in a rented room that was the entire extent of my new company, and I began. The company was called Groundwork. The name was deliberate. Everything I had built had come from the ground. From the 2 bags and the 3-hour drive and the part-time job and the months of difficult money decisions and the 3 years of the program and the 4 years at the studio. There was no inheritance in it. No family connection. No safety net that had been prepared in advance. Just the ground. And the work. In the first year, I had 6 clients. In the second year, I had 14. In the third year, I hired my first employee, a young designer named Remy, who had the specific quality of someone who sees what you see and can be trusted to see it alone when you are not in the room. By the 4th year of Groundwork, I had a team of 7 and a client list that included 3 companies I had admired for years and had not expected to work with for another decade. I did not call my mother to tell her any of it. I was still not ready. Amma called me every week. She had been the constant through everything, the person who had known me before the design program and the studio and Groundwork, and who knew me as her sister rather than as the person who had left on a Saturday morning with 2 bags. She had followed everything. She had celebrated everything. She had sat in the front row at my graduation and cried without apology. She had also, over 14 years, served as my careful and honest source of information about our mother. She told me things without editorializing. She had a gift for that, the plain delivery of facts that allowed me to form my own interpretation without the interference of her own. She told me in my 3rd year at Groundwork that our mother had mentioned my name at a family gathering. Not with pride exactly. With the careful neutrality of someone who has decided to acknowledge something exists without committing to a position on it. She told me in my 4th year that our mother had asked whether I was doing well. She told me in my 5th year that our mother had told a colleague her daughter ran a design company. I sat with each of these pieces of information. I did not read too much into them. I did not reach out. I simply noted them the way you note the gradual change in weather, present, observable, not yet requiring action. I was waiting for something I could not yet name. The award was announced on a Wednesday morning. I was at my desk at Groundwork when the email arrived from the Design Council. The subject line was direct. I had learned to distrust subject lines that were not direct. And what it said was that Groundwork had been selected as the recipient of the Annual Industry Award for Outstanding Contribution to Brand and Visual Communication. I read the email twice. Then I called Remy into my office and showed her the screen. She read it. She looked at me. She made a sound I will not try to describe because it does not translate into words, but that I understood completely. The award was not the largest recognition available in the sector. It was not the one that came with a significant financial component or the kind of international coverage that changes the scale of a studio overnight. But it was the one that the people I respected most in my industry took seriously. It was given by a body whose assessment I trusted. And it came with a profile piece in the most widely read publication in our sector, the kind of visibility that reaches people who have not been looking for you. I accepted the award at a dinner 3 weeks later. Amma came. She wore a dress she had bought specifically for the occasion, and she sat at our table and laughed too loudly at the speeches and told me 3 times that she was proud of me in the direct, unguarded way she had always had. I gave a short speech. I thanked Clem. I thanked Remy and the team. I thanked Dama. I did not thank my mother, but I thought about her. Briefly. Standing at the podium with the award in my hands, I thought about a kitchen and a Thursday evening and 5 words. Then I gave my speech and sat down. The profile piece ran 4 weeks after the award dinner. It was thorough in the way the best industry pieces are thorough, not just the surface facts of the company and the work, but the thinking underneath it. The journalist had spent 2 days with me and my team and had asked the kind of questions that require you to articulate things you have always known but never needed to put into words before. She asked about the origin of the company name. I told her about the ground, about building from it, about the specific value of having no safety net because a safety net, I had learned, was also a ceiling, something that caught you when you fell, but also prevented you from understanding how high you could go when you did not fall. She asked about my path to the sector. I told her about the accounting degree I had left, about the design program, about the 2 bags and the 3-hour drive. I was careful about what I shared, not evasive, simply precise. I did not mention my mother by name. I did not name the kitchen or the Thursday evening or the 5 words. But I said this. I said, I was told at 22 by someone I loved that I would amount to nothing. I have thought about that sentence many times since. Not with anger. With a kind of gratitude I did not expect. Because it clarified something I might have taken years to understand otherwise, that the only assessment of your potential that matters is the one you make yourself and then prove. The piece ran on a Thursday. By Friday, it had been shared 47 times on the industry network. Alma called me on the Saturday after the piece ran. She said, "Mum read it." I said, "How do you know?" She said, "Because she called me at 7 in the morning and read me 3 paragraphs from it out loud." I sat with that for a moment. 7 in the morning. Reading paragraphs out loud. To Alma. Which meant she had been up early enough that the piece had been the first thing she engaged with. Which meant she had either been awake when it published or had gone looking for it. I said, "What did she say?" Alma said, "She said you always had a gift. She said she just did not know how to support it." I said, "She told me I would amount to nothing." Alma said, "I know." She knows too. A silence. Then Alma said, "She has not called you." I said, "No." Alma said, "She wants to. She does not know how." I said, "She has had 14 years to find out how." Alma said, "I know. I am not asking you to make it easy for her. I am just telling you what she said." I thanked her. We talked about other things. Then we said goodbye. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that call. I want to tell you something about the 14 years honestly, because I think there is a version of this story that presents itself as a clean arc, the dismissed child who builds an empire and returns to claim vindication, and that version is easier to tell and less true than what actually happened. The 14 years were not a continuous march toward this moment. They were 14 actual years. With difficult months and a client I lost in year 2 that cost me sleep for weeks. With the specific loneliness of building something largely alone. With the evenings I sat at my desk after everyone had gone home and wondered whether the thing I was building was as real as it felt when I was inside it. With the specific, persistent ache of a woman whose mother had decided at 22 that her future was empty and had spent 14 years not revising that assessment in any way I could directly see or feel. I had not built groundwork in order to prove my mother wrong. I had built it because the work was the truest thing I knew how to do. The proving wrong was a consequence, not a motivation. But I want to be honest. The ache was there. It was always there. Not at the front of everything. I had learned to work around it and beside it and through it. But it was present in the way that things are present when they have not been resolved. A low note underneath everything else. I had hoped, without quite admitting it, that 14 years of evidence might be enough to resolve it without a conversation. It had not been enough. My mother Googled my name on a Tuesday. I know this because Amma told me. And I know the specific detail of it, the Tuesday, the searching, the sitting with the results, because Amma had been there. She had been visiting our mother that afternoon and had watched it happen. She said our mother had been quiet for a while after lunch, sitting at the kitchen table with her phone, not talking, just sitting in the particular stillness of someone processing something they have not yet decided what to do with. Then she had opened her browser. She had typed my name. Amma said she watched our mother's face as the results loaded. The award announcement. The profile piece. The studio website. The industry journal from my second year at Clem Studio, the one that had sat in my drawer for years. The trail of a 14-year career that had been building in public while our mother had been living 3 hours away not looking. She had read for a long time. Amma said she had not said anything. Not while she was reading and not when she put the phone down. She had simply sat at the kitchen table with her hands flat on the surface and looked out the window at the garden. Then she had said 4 words. She said, "I was so wrong." Not to Amma. Not to anyone. Just out loud. Into the kitchen. The acknowledgement of someone who has been presented with evidence they can no longer argue with and has finally, fully, stopped arguing. She has not called since. I want to sit with that sentence because I think it is the most important one in this story, and I think it is the one that requires the most honesty to explain. She has not called. Not because she does not want to. Amma has told me she wants to. Amma has told me she has picked up the phone more than once and put it down. That she has started messages she has not sent. That she is carrying something she does not know how to deliver. I understand this. I understand it more than I expected to. She told me at 22 that I would amount to nothing. She said it with the certainty of someone who has never been wrong about the things that matter. And now she is sitting with 14 years of evidence that she was completely, measurably, publicly wrong about this one. The woman who built her entire life on the certain foundation of her own judgment is having to sit inside the knowledge that her judgment failed the person she was supposed to know best. That is not a small thing to carry. I do not know what she will do with it. I do not know if she will call. I do not know if I am ready for her to call or what I will say when she does or whether the conversation that has been waiting for 14 years will be the one that finally closes the distance or simply reveals how wide it has become. What I know is this. I am not waiting for it anymore. I had waited for a long time. I want to be honest about that. For the first several years, I had waited in the active way, monitoring for signs, reading into small things, hoping that each piece of information Amma shared was the precursor to something more direct. Waiting for my mother to revise the sentence. To call and say I was wrong. To find some way across the distance that she had created on a Thursday evening in a kitchen. The waiting had been exhausting in the specific way that hope is exhausting when it is maintained without evidence for a long time. At some point in the middle years, I cannot identify the exact moment. It was not a single decision, but a gradual one. I had stopped waiting in the active way and started simply living. Not giving up. Not closing the door. Simply redirecting the energy that had been spent looking for signs into the work and the people and the life that were actually in front of me. Groundwork grew faster in those years. I think that is connected. I think the energy that is spent waiting for someone to revise their assessment of you is energy that could be spent revising it yourself through the accumulation of evidence. And I think the evidence you accumulate when you stop waiting for permission is different in quality from the evidence you accumulate when you are still, in some part of yourself, performing for an audience. I had stopped performing for an audience. I had started building for myself. The difference was everything. Remy asked me once, in the direct way she had of asking things that other people left unasked, whether I had family who came to the studio events. We were preparing for an open studio day. The kind of event where the work goes on the walls and the clients and collaborators and industry people come through, and the team is visible in the way that matters for a studio's reputation. I said, "My sister comes to things." She said, "And your parents?" I said, "My father has not been in my life since I was 9. My mother and I are complicated." She looked at me for a moment with the expression she had when she was deciding whether to pursue something. She said, "Is she proud of you?" I thought about it honestly. I said, "I think she is beginning to understand what there is to be proud of." Remy said, "That is a very careful answer." I said, "It is a very careful situation." She nodded. She did not push it further. That evening after the open studio, I sat at my desk alone and thought about what I had said. I think she is beginning to understand what there is to be proud of. It was not the answer I had wanted to give for 14 years. It was not the answer I would have given at 22 or at 25 or even at 30. But it was true. And true had to be enough for now. Alma came to the studio on a Friday afternoon 3 weeks after the Tuesday Google search. She did not call ahead. She simply appeared at the door with the specific expression of someone who has been thinking about something for long enough that they have stopped thinking and started moving. I made tea. We sat in my office with the door closed. She said, "I need to ask you something." I said, "Ask." She said, "Are you going to call her?" I sat with the question. It was not the question of whether I forgave her. I had done most of the forgiveness work in the years when I had stopped waiting actively and started simply living. Forgiveness, I had learned, is not a conversation. It is a decision you make for yourself in the ordinary hours of your own life, usually without the other person present and often without them knowing it has happened. It was not the question of whether I wanted a relationship with her. I did. I had always wanted the version of my mother who could look at what I had built and say I was wrong and mean it fully and then find a way forward. It was the question of whether I was ready. Whether I had enough steadiness to walk into that conversation without needing it to go a specific way. Without the outcome being the measure of my own stability. I said, "Not yet." Alma said, "Okay." I said, "But tell her I know she looked." Alma said, "She will know what that means?" I said, "Yes. She will know exactly what it means." What it meant was this. I had spent 14 years building something that could be found. Not for her. For myself. But it could be found, and she had found it, and I knew she had found it, and she knew I knew. That was a conversation without a phone call. The first one we had managed in 14 years. And it changed something. Not everything. Not the Thursday kitchen, or the 5 words, or the 11 months of silence, or the 14 years of careful distance. But something. It changed the quality of the space between us from silence to acknowledgement. Silence is the absence of communication. Acknowledgement is its beginning. I was not ready to begin. But I was ready to acknowledge that beginning was possible. That was new. That mattered. Remy noticed something had shifted in the weeks that followed. She did not say anything directly. She had a gift for knowing what not to say and when, but she made tea for me on Tuesday mornings without being asked, which was her version of paying attention to something she had decided not to name. I drank the tea. I went back to work. I was building something. I had always been building something. The building did not stop because the other things were moving too. The second award came in my 7th year of groundwork. Larger than the first. International in scope. The kind of recognition that reaches beyond the sector and into the wider world of business and culture, where design is discussed as a force rather than a service. The announcement was covered by 3 publications that had not previously covered my work. One of them was not a design publication at all. It was a business journal whose readership was the kind of professional audience my mother had spent her career among and respected. Alma called me the morning the business journal piece ran. She said, "She is going to see this one." I said, "I know." She said, "How do you feel about that?" I thought about it honestly. I checked my internal state the way I always did before something that required steadiness. I said, "I feel ready." Alma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Ready for what?" I said, "Ready for whatever she does with it. If she calls, I will answer. If she does not call, I will keep working. Either way, I am not waiting anymore." Alma said, "When did that happen?" I said, "Slowly. And then all at once." She laughed. Then she said she loved me. I said I loved her too. I went back to work. I thought a great deal in those weeks about what my mother's silence had given me. Not the silence of those 14 years, the silence of the not calling since the Tuesday Google search. The silence of a woman who has seen something that has reordered her understanding of her own history and is sitting inside that reordering without knowing how to move. I thought about what it would have cost me if she had called immediately after reading the profile piece. In the first hours of the recognition. The first rush of feeling. It would have cost me the chance to arrive at this conversation from a place of genuine stability rather than the relief of finally having the thing I had been waiting for. The delay had not been a withholding. It had been, without her knowing it, a gift. I had spent the weeks since the Tuesday Google search arriving at a version of myself who did not need the call to validate the work. Who could receive the call, if it came, as the beginning of something new rather than the resolution of something old. The work was the resolution. It had always been the resolution. She had Googled my name. She had read what she found. She had said 4 words into a kitchen. The sentence from 14 years ago had been answered. Not by a conversation. By a career. By 7 years of groundwork and 14 years of building and the specific courage of a 22-year-old who had packed 2 bags and driven 3 hours because the truest version of herself required it. The answer had been there for years. She had simply needed to look. She called on a Thursday evening. 14 years and 4 months after the kitchen. A Thursday again, I noted that. Some things returned to the same day. I was at home. I was making dinner. My phone was on the counter, and when it rang I looked at the screen and saw her name and stood very still for a moment. Then I answered. She said, "Zola." I said, "Mum." A silence. Not uncomfortable. The silence of 2 people who have a great deal to say and are deciding where to begin. She said, "I read the piece. The profile piece from the award. I read it in April." I said, "I know. Amma told me." She said, "I have been trying to call since April." I said, "I know that too." Another silence. Then she said, "I was wrong." 3 words. The same number as the 4 words she had said into the kitchen. I was so wrong, but directed this time. At me. With the full weight of someone who has been carrying something for a long time and is finally putting it down in front of the person it belongs to. I said, yes. Not to wound her. Simply because it was true and she deserved honesty more than she deserved comfort. She said, "I am sorry." I said, "I know." Then I said, "I am glad you called." And I meant it. Completely. Without condition or reservation or the need for it to mean anything beyond what it was. She had called. I had answered. We talked for 47 minutes. It was the beginning of something. Not the resolution of everything. The beginning. That was enough. I want to tell you about the 47 minutes honestly, because I think people expect a reconciliation scene to be a particular thing, and this one was not that. It was not tearful. Not dramatic. Not the kind of conversation that resolves 14 years of distance in one sitting, because those conversations do not exist, and I had stopped expecting them to. It was careful. It was honest. It was 2 people who know each other in the deep, particular way of a parent and child and who have spent 14 years without the space to use that knowledge, finding their way back to a language they used to share. She told me she had been frightened for me when I left. Not of failure specifically. Of the unprotected quality of the path I had chosen. She had spent her whole life making things certain, and I had walked into uncertainty with what looked to her like nothing but conviction, and she had not been able to separate her fear from her assessment. I told her I understood that. I did. I told her the sentence had cost me something. Not the leaving, I would have left regardless. But carrying it. The weight of being told your future is empty by the person who is supposed to know you best. She said, I know. I am sorry. I said, I know you are. We talked about Amma. About the studio. About small things that had nothing to do with the large things, but that needed to be said because the large things need the small ones around them, or they become too heavy to hold. At the end I said, come and see the studio when you are ready. She said, I would like that. I said, me too. She came on a Saturday in autumn. I had not told the team she was coming. It was not a performance, and I did not want it to feel like one. It was simply my mother, coming to see where I worked, in the ordinary way that parents do when the distance between them and their children has finally shortened enough to make the visit possible. She arrived at 10. I met her at the door. She looked at the building first, the outside of it, the sign that said groundwork in the specific typeface I had chosen myself, and then she looked at me. She said, "It is real." I said, "It has been real for 7 years." She said, "I know. I am just seeing it." I showed her everything. The studio, the work on the walls, the team working at their desks, Remy, who shook my mother's hand with the quiet directness she brought to everything, and the others who were kind and welcoming in the uncomplicated way of people who had not needed to earn anything from this visit. My mother walked through slowly. She looked at the work with the careful attention of someone trying to understand something in a language they have not been taught but recognize is significant. At the end, she stood in my office. She looked at the award on the shelf. She looked at the profile piece framed on the wall. Remy had framed it without asking me and hung it, and I had not taken it down. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You always had this. I just did not have eyes for it yet." I said, "You have them now." She said, "Yes." We had lunch. We talked about things that had nothing to do with the last 14 years and everything to do with the next 14. It was enough. It was more than enough. People ask me sometimes what I would say to my 22-year-old self. The one standing in the kitchen on a Thursday evening who had just been told she would amount to nothing. I would say, "You are going to drive 3 hours and unpack 2 bags into a small room and stand at a window looking at a city you do not yet know and feel afraid. Let yourself feel afraid. It does not mean you are wrong." I would say, "The sentence she just said is going to travel with you for a long time. You will carry it in the years when the work is difficult and the money is difficult and the certainty is difficult. You will feel its weight on the days when nothing moves and you are not sure the thing you are building is as real as it feels from the inside. Let it travel with you. Do not try to outrun it. It will not break you. It will clarify you." I would say, build anyway. Build from the ground. Build without the safety net, and without the permission, and without the validation of the person whose validation you most want. Build because the work is the truest thing you know how to do, and because the only assessment of your potential that matters is the one you make yourself and then prove. And I would say, she will Google your name on a Tuesday 14 years from now. She will sit at a kitchen table with her hands flat on the surface and look out at the garden and say 4 words into an empty room. She will say, "I was so wrong." And you will not be there to hear it. You will be 3 hours away in the studio you built from the ground, working on the next thing, not waiting for the revision anymore because you stopped needing it somewhere in the middle years when the building became its own answer. But you will know it happened. And it will matter. Not because it changes the Thursday kitchen. Nothing changes the Thursday kitchen. But because 14 years of evidence is a powerful thing. And a woman who was told she would amount to nothing can look at 14 years of evidence and know, with the same completeness that the sentence was delivered with, that the sentence was wrong. My name is Zola. I run a company called Groundwork. I built it from 2 bags and a 3-hour drive and the specific determination of someone who had been told her future was empty and had decided to fill it herself. My mother Googled my name last Tuesday. She has not called since. But she will. And I will answer.